Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Judiciary Committee of the State Senate uh, in conjunction with the State Assembly Roundtable for a discussion about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on recent law school graduates, the New York bar exam, and alternate pathways to attorney admission, including diploma privilege. I'm State Senator Brad Hoylman, Chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I'm joined today by our co-host, Assembly Member Joanne Simon, with whom I sponsored two bills that would extend a form of diploma privilege during the COVID-19 pandemic for law school graduates seeking admission to practice law in New York State. Welcome, Assembly Member Simon. Before we get underway, I'd like to note the colleagues who are here uh, from the New York State Legislature. Uh, I'd like to welcome State Senator Anna Kaplan, Senator Monica Martinez, Senator Jim Gorin, Senator Andrew Gennardis, Senator Tom O'Mara, my counterpart in the Judiciary Committee, State Senator, Assembly Member and Judiciary Chair, Assembly Member Jeff Dinowitz. Hi, Jeff. And we also have with us Assembly Member Judy Griffin. And I think that is our roster at this point. Before we get started, I wanted to show the viewers a real-time example of one of the difficulties involving the online administration of the bar exam. And I think you should be able to see it now. But this is an example of
You have to listen for the click.
software that is being used in Florida to administer an online version of the bar exam. And you can see the lag time. My goodness, it's hard enough to describe the Equal Protection Clause, much less use a delayed software when you're on a clock to complete your response. This is just one example of the difficulties of the online exam, and we'll be discussing that today. Stanley, I think folks get the picture if you could exit out of that. As I'm so appreciative of everyone for joining us. And our roundtable features a slate of impressive panelists who have taken the time to join us this morning to speak with us about the disruption that COVID-19 has caused for recent grads. Under, we'll be introducing them in a moment, but I first wanted to explain the reason why we're here today. Under normal circumstances, the path to being admitted as an attorney in New York includes taking the two-day uniform bar exam, UBE, that's offered as an in-person exam in February and July. In March, as COVID-19 infections were spiking in New York, the Court of Appeals, the body typically vested with the responsibility of governing attorney admissions, postponed the July exam to September. And as we're going to get here later, law graduates scrambled to adjust to the 2-month delay, which disrupted employment opportunities, created expensive bar preparation course difficulties, and as well, um, a whole host of difficulties around family responsibilities. Meanwhile, it's become increasingly clear as COVID-19 infections have flared up around the country that an in-person exam could not be safely accommodated in September. Recognizing this looming public health disaster, in early July, Assemblymember Simon and I, in consultation with Assemblymember Dinowitz, introduced our first bill to grant a form of diploma privilege for the duration of the COVID-19 state of emergency to allow law graduates to be admitted to practice as attorneys without having to take the UBE. And less than a week after our bill was introduced, though, the Court of Appeals canceled the September bar exam without a backup plan in place. A working group appointed by the chief judge deliberated for a week on alternatives, and on July 23rd, the Court of Appeals announced it would administer the state bar exam remotely on October 5th and 6th, joining 17 other states plus Washington, D.C. and the Virgin Islands. That's where we find ourselves today. Though many questions remain about the security, accessibility, and equality of an online exam, many of which we'll be discussing. With that prelude, I'm going to hand it over to Assemblymember Simon for her introductory remarks, and then we'll get to the panel.
Thank you, Senator. I want to thank you for the cooperation that you and your office have displayed in working on this very important legislation and keeping each other informed of what's going on. This is we are in unprecedented times of immense uncertainty, and every day it seems something else is happening in this arena. And, you know, as you said, law graduates would normally take a July bar exam and go to work representing members of the public. Many of those graduates would be working for government offices, including prosecutors, public interest firms like legal services, legal aid. And now like so many other graduates around the country, New York's graduates are in limbo, and nobody really knows for how long. Today's roundtable is to help recent graduates and others explain how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected their lives as it relates to taking the bar exam and what it means for them financially, physically, and mentally, as well as the effect on the legal marketplace now and in the foreseeable future. And there's a legal term for you, foreseeable, and the reality is right now, almost nothing is foreseeable. We are left to make decisions based on a host of speculative options in some respects. The bar examining entities in various states, including New York, seem to have been planning for the last war and not really for the future. Which is going to be very different. If we've learned nothing from COVID-19, it's that we really need to not just think outside the box, we need to take the box and throw it away. The unprecedented use of technology strains many limits and may yet not be viable for this task. There are only 2 vendors remaining in that marketplace to administer an online bar exam. And there are, of course, as you mentioned, some unknown implications for privacy violations and for violations of disability rights protections in the taking of these bar exams. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our recent grads who have been advocating for diploma privilege. I'm interested in talking with some of our experts about ways that we can move forward in terms of alternatives to taking the UBE. And I want to thank as well members of my staff, those who are working closely with me, including Susanna Pasquantonio, my chief of staff, who's been doing yo-person's work on this, as well as all of my other staff members who have been stuck listening to me talk about this for the last several weeks. So with that, I will turn this back over to you, Senator, for some housekeeping details, and then we'll move on with the introduction of our panelists.
Thank you, Assemblymember Simon, and I wanted to acknowledge Senator Shelley Mayer, who's joined us, as well as thank my Albany Chief of Staff and Legislative Counsel Burton Phillips for all of his work on the legislation and coordinating with your office. Our discussion today is going to be structured as three separate issues: the impact of COVID-19 on law graduates, lingering concerns about an online bar exam, and finally, diploma privilege as a possible path forward. At the beginning of the discussion of each issue, Assemblymember Simon and I will kick off the discussion with questions for the panelists. We'll then turn it over to our legislative colleagues for follow-up Q&A. They can raise their hand or try to indicate some other way that they would like to speak. With that, let's get started by introducing today's panelists, Assemblymember Simon.
Great, thank you so much, Senator. So I'm going to introduce each panelist and give them an opportunity to make a very brief introductory statement. And we'll start first with the law graduates. Leslie Ann Caraballo is a 2020 graduate of CUNY School of Law and a member of the New York State Law Graduate Coalition. Leslie?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Senator Hoylman and Assemblymember Simon, for your staunch support and for hosting this panel today. The Law Grad Coalition was created in March when our path to licensure, the fruit of 3 years of financial, personal, emotional investment and sacrifice, became uncertain in the face of COVID-19. We sent a letter to the Court of Appeals on April 3rd, signed by 1,500 New York State Law School students asking for a solid path forward, a plan for the inevitability that experts had already predicted that an in-person bar exam should not be held. Despite the science, despite our pleas, despite a global health crisis not seen in 100 years, the powers that be pressed forward in a business as usual manner, when business is anything but usual these days. For my part, I am a first-generation non-traditional law graduate, a constituent of the 72nd Assembly and 31st Senate districts, a lifelong New Yorican in a New York City 2-bedroom apartment with 2 young children, ages 10 and 5. One of which is a child with a disability. My mother, their grandmother, suffers from respiratory ailments. I have no childcare due to COVID-19, and therefore very few opportunities to study effectively for this exam. I am set to become a housing attorney for one of New York State's larger public interest organizations, and therefore I sit at the intersection of the bar exam, parenting in the age of COVID, race, disability, and a looming eviction crisis. But I am not alone. Many, many graduates are grappling with significant challenges, and I am here to shed light on their struggles and the disparate impact this exam's handling is having on them. I hope that we will contextualize this conversation within the frame of the bar exam's discriminatory origins and the historical efforts of New York's Black lawyers and others in advocating against it. To be clear, this is about the access to the profession in the midst of a pandemic, in the wake of Black Lives Matter, that we cannot truly reform the legal system if we don't ensure an equitable path to licensure for all those who are already underrepresented within it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we'll turn this to Mike Machado, who is a 2020 graduate of Penn Law School and joins the panel as a member of United for Diploma Privilege New York. He will soon join a real estate group at a law firm in New York. Mike.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Senator Hoylman, Assemblywoman Simon, and all of you who are here today to hear us. My name is Mike. Of course, I graduated from Penn Law School in May. Like many of you, I have a pandemic story. Mine starts with my immune-compromised father, who miraculously survived COVID, thankfully, and it ends, as it does for so many of my peers, with no health insurance and no financial certainty. I'm speaking today in light of my experience working part-time during my last year of law school at the firm from which I do have an offer of employment, which has now been postponed to February. But I also speak as somebody who is eager to serve the public, who should be able to rely on New York's promise of competent lawyers. But the current plan to administer this bar exam in October falls well short of that promise. And it's a disservice to graduates and to the public whom the exam purportedly serves. So I look forward to explaining why that is and to answering any questions you all may have for us. And thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Next, we have Alex Picanis, who is a licensed New York State attorney who took the February bar. Way to go, Alex. He joins today's panel as a member of United for Diploma Privilege New York. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Good morning. My name is Alex. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. I am a licensed attorney practicing in Brooklyn, New York. In February, I took and passed the New York State Bar exam as part of New York's Pro Bono Scholars Program. After I took the exam, I spent 3 months doing immigration and other legal full-time work at the Anti-Violence Project. And following that period of supervision, I graduated, got results from the exam, and was admitted to the bar. So I'm here today to state that instituting an alternative pathway to licensure will not lead to unprepared attorneys, and that diploma privilege, as proposed by Assemblymember Simon and Senator Hoylman in their bills, is the only ethical way to ensure that legal services are available to New Yorkers during the upcoming period of economic recession. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. Next, we have Tara Roslin, who's a recent graduate of Boston University School of Law. She has multiple disabilities and is the Director of Research for the National Disabled Law Students Association. Tara?
Hey there, thank you very much, Assembly Member Simon and Senator Hoylman, for inviting me to speak today. So as Assembly Member Simon mentioned, I am multiply disabled. I'm a bar applicant who's immunocompromised. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Crohn's disease, positional orthostatic tachycardia, and myself and many of my peers have yet to receive their accommodation arrangements for an online exam. As other panelists have mentioned, I have lost my health insurance. It's expired. I was on student insurance and am trying to get on Medicare so that I can continue to receive my life-saving medications. My job was also pushed back due to the bar exam delay. And NDLSA, the National Disabled Law Students Association, is gravely concerned about the disparate impact that the online bar exam is going to have on disabled graduates, including but not limited to disproportionate artificial intelligence flagging for disabled bodies, and coercing candidates to come in person in order to get their originally promised accommodations. And I'd just like to say very clearly that we don't have time to do more, whether it's the truth or an excuse. In this case, it very may well be true because of the short time frame we're working on, but this is never a justifiable statement when you're explaining why disabled candidates are not getting what they're legally entitled to. So I look forward to a fruitful discussion, and we believe that the only equitable path forward that doesn't lead to the disparate failing of disabled candidates is diploma privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Kayla Smith, who is a 2020 graduate of Brooklyn Law School and a member of United for Diploma Privilege New York. And I might just take a moment of geographic privilege and say that I represent Brooklyn Law School. So I'm very happy to see so many graduates of Brooklyn Law School here on the panel today. Thank you. Kayla.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I want to say thanks for Assemblymember Simon and Senator Brad Hoylman for hosting this meeting. It's so important. I also want to thank anyone who's watching, not just other legislators, but members of the public or other graduates. This is such an important moment for us. This is such an important test for us. And it's so important to be able to talk about how right now it's just inequitable. I'm starting as a public defender next month in Manhattan, and I would love to get started, and I would love to be representing our most disadvantaged populations, but I'm not able to do that. My life and career has been fully put on hold in the same way that all of my colleagues have had their lives and careers put on hold. We really just want to get started. We want to do the things that we went to law school to do, and it seems like we're not being given that opportunity to follow every single path that we were supposed to be walking down. The Court of Appeals keeps kicking the can down the road. We're just looking for a solution. We're just looking for a path to licensure. We're just looking to get started. So I'm incredibly excited to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Kayla. And we're also joined by Dean Eduardo Peñalva, and he is the Alan R. Tesler Dean and Professor of Law at Cornell Law School in Ithaca, New York. And he joins us as a general representative for the deans of New York's 15 law schools. Dean Peñalva, how are you?
Good morning. Thank you. I just want to begin by thanking Senator Hoylman and Assemblymember Simon for hosting this discussion and inviting me to participate in it on behalf of the New York Law Deans. Along with the deans of the 14 other ABA accredited law schools in New York, I've been advocating on behalf of our graduates regarding the timing and format of the bar exam and alternatives to the examination in light of the COVID pandemic. In our collective opinion, a diploma privilege is a vital component of any sound response to the unprecedented circumstances we're facing. An online examination has many merits, particularly for repeat test takers who need a mechanism to gain admission to the bar before the pandemic is behind us, but relying exclusively on an online examination is both risky and unfair. And this is true for all of our 2020 graduates on whom the pandemic has placed a unique and undue burden, but it's particularly true for those from low-income backgrounds or from the Black and Brown communities hit hardest by the pandemic. For those of us who are not entering practice for those of our graduates who are not entering practice at large firms, a postponed examination and admission to the bar means additional expense and delayed livelihoods. For many, it means food and housing insecurity, as well as the loss of employer-sponsored health insurance during a pandemic, all of which combine to make preparation for the bar examination, whether it's online or in person, even more difficult. The recent reports of complications with the administration of online examinations in other jurisdictions, most recently Florida, only strengthens the case for diploma privilege. Security breaches, technical difficulties, internet outages, and the inadequacies of some online proctoring products remain among the myriad concerns raised by an online exam. Temporary practice authorizations are also inadequate substitutes because they simply delay the disruption to a later time with similarly disparate impacts on those who have not secured employment. Many law school graduates are now in a state of limbo. In order to study for the exam, they have to quit jobs, take leaves of absence, and borrow money to pay for housing and food. And most of these graduates currently or will imminently face significant loan repayment obligations and need to be licensed to either start employment, keep it, or find it. In light of the unprecedented challenges presented by the current pandemic, I urge New York State to create a diploma privilege as a pathway for admission to the bar for members of the class of 2020. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean. Next, we're going to turn to Professor Deborah Jones Merritt, who is a professor at Ohio State University's Moritz College of Law. She co-authored a widely circulated paper discussing how to handle licensing during the pandemic and maintains a website on those issues. Professor Merritt.
I've been studying legal education and licensing for many years, and most recently completed a national study of the knowledge and skills that new lawyers need during their first year of practice. The study included several focus groups of lawyers in New York State from both urban and rural areas. These results conclusively show that the current bar exam offers a very poor measure of minimum competence. We started the study to look at the bar exam more generally, not for this COVID period, but the results are quite persuasive. A JD degree, I believe, provides at least as much assurance of competence as the current bar exam, and a degree combined with a period of supervised practice would be highly effective. Based on these findings and other research, I co-authored a paper in March, as the Assembly member mentioned, advising jurisdictions about ways to approach licensing during a pandemic. We laid out the problems and solutions then, including the equity issues and the pressing need for legal services. We didn't say it nearly as well as the graduates who spoke today, but we were able to say it while they were still in law school. And we hope that courts and bar examiners would plan ahead. Unfortunately, that was 5 months ago, and I've been horrified by most of you by the lack of response from bar examiners and courts in most states.
Thank you, Professor. We're looking forward to hearing more about this. Next, we have Jared Trujillo, who is the president of the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys, UAW Local 2325. The ALAA represents lawyers and law graduates at not-for-profit organizations in New York City, Nassau County, and Orange County. Jared.
Good morning, Assemblywoman. Good morning, Senator, and everyone else. And thank you so much for inviting me on and for really having this important meeting about such an important issue. Our members really represent people on the worst days of their lives. Unfortunately, you don't get a legal aid attorney because everything's great. You get a legal aid attorney because you're at risk of losing your freedom. You're at risk of losing your ability to live in the only country that you've ever called home. You're at risk of being a child that's taken away from their parents. And our members are incredibly dedicated. Our law graduates and our attorney members are not the best paid people in the courtroom, but we do it because we really love the work. And with the bar exam being canceled and with everything that COVID has done to the certainty that people have with the bar exam, it's really put our members in an unnecessarily precarious position, which not only impacts the legal workers, but it also impacts the hundreds of thousands of low-income New Yorkers that we serve every day. We have people that are first-time test takers who, again, go to work for legal services organizations, not to make a lot of money, who are really, they just don't know what the future will look like. And it's wholly inadequate that the state hasn't done something to make sure that they have a little bit more certainty. In addition, we represent a lot of retakers. So in New York, if you can practice under supervision up till the first time after you fail to successfully pass the bar exam. However, after that second failure, you can no longer practice under supervision. So what does that actually mean? That means that if you have a loan repayment assistance program that you're relying on, that means you no longer have access to that. That means that you could potentially lose your employment at a lot of different legal services organizations, which means that you're losing healthcare and potentially the stability of housing and everything else that comes with having a salary during a global pandemic. And it also means that the clients that you've been successfully representing for several months lose that attorney that knows their lives, that knows their case during a pandemic that is really upending everyone's what everyone thinks that they know. So I'm incredibly grateful for this hearing. I'm incredibly grateful for the people that are on, and I'm sure that together we can come up with some equitable solutions to fix this true issue that we're having.
Thank you very much. And finally, Assembly Member Jeffrey Dinowitz, who is the chair of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. Assemblyman?
Thank you. Good morning. First, let me start by thanking Assemblymember Simon and Senator Hoylman. I know how much effort you've put into this and how important it is. None of us have lived through what we're all living through now because we haven't had a pandemic of this scale in over 100 years. And we have taken steps in many areas to try to deal with the situation. For example, we passed legislation, Senator Hoylman and I, to prevent evictions of tenants. We passed legislation to make sure people can vote by absentee ballot. We've done other things dealing with unemployment. Everybody has been inconvenienced at best and perhaps much worse because of the virus. And we try to take steps to address the issue. So I think trying to deal with this issue of recent law graduates would not seem surprising to anybody. And the question is, what do we do? I don't know the answer. I think most of you have a very strong opinion as to what we should do. You know, do we have a later exam, an exam a year later? That might make sense to some people, but on the other hand, there are a lot of unfairnesses, as already been described, connected with that. Do we have an online exam? That would seem like a logical option also, except there were big problems with that. Do we have no exam, which is what many of you are advocating for? And I would say that most of the probably hundreds of thousands of people who've previously taken the exam might not think that that's fair, but maybe that's the only fair way. So I'm glad that people are weighing in. I look forward to hearing what everybody has to say about this, because I think we can not simply ignore the situation. I know that many decisions are being made not by the state legislature, but we do have the ability to pass legislation. And I think whatever we do, we should do the right thing. We should do something that's fair to everybody and that makes sense. So I appreciate everybody participating in this roundtable. And I look forward to hearing what you all have to say.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And finally, I would just like to mention that we extended an invitation to participate to the New York Board of Law Examiners, but unfortunately they declined to send a representative this morning. So hopefully they're tuning in, and we will now move to our first set of questions. And Senator, I believe that you were going to introduce that.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to all the speakers for your kind of framing the issue. We wanted to drill down a little bit, and thank you, as Assemblymember Dinowitz. We wanted to drill down a little bit on the impact of of COVID-19 on law graduates and the bar exam. And we heard a little bit of what of how it's impacting you, but I was interested in maybe more specific anecdotal evidence that you might have from you and your classmates as to how is this affecting your post-graduation plans? I mean, are we looking at essentially massive unemployment among the recent class of law grads? It's true that if you go to a white shoe firm, they'll probably take you on, as the dean suggested, but so many of our law grads are not in that position and are going to be struggling with loan repayments, healthcare, paying their rent. Could you, we'll start with you, Mike, because you mentioned it briefly, and I know some of your colleagues on the line wanted to speak too, but could you describe, like, on a personal level, how is that impacting your life, and what does it mean for the future?
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. Thank you. I am due to start at a law firm now in February. It's a place where I would have begun to work in September or October had life proceeded normally, which it has not. Dean Peñalver, you mentioned before this distinction between these firms and some of these other places that will not hire. Unfortunately, it's actually the case that firms have delayed until this whole licensing or bar exam situation is handled. So my firm is an example of that. And I do believe that most firms that people are going to have made statements to that effect. So what does it mean for me? I'm home now. Sorry, I don't mean to get emotional. I'm home now with my family, which is great. I'm more fortunate than a lot of other people. I have a place to live, which is not the case for many of my classmates. But my family cannot afford the house we live in for much longer, and they were interested in selling and moving on with their lives. And I'm the one here with them, and that's what's keeping them here, and would like to proceed with life, but they can't do that because I'm here now. I have Sallie Mae knocking on my door because they want to get paid, and I don't have a way of paying them. And I don't have health insurance, which is the biggest thing for me. I have foregone visits to the ER because of a pre-existing condition called diverticulitis, that basically it attacks my stomach, and I'll just like hover over in pain for a very long time. And it's very painful, but I don't go to the ER because I don't have the insurance and I don't have the money, and I can't count on money to pay the bill that's going to come once I do visit the ER. So that's why the situation is very important to me. My family's counting on me to earn the money that a law firm pays, and it's a very privileged and fortunate position. And I don't pretend to be in the circumstances that the people who you're helping with legislation that Assemblymember Dinowitz mentioned. I don't pretend to compare myself, but that's just my story, and I appreciate you all hearing it.
And let me just follow up with Leslie, and then I'll open it up for my colleagues who may have specific questions about the real world impact of this delay. Leslie, what's your personal experience, and what are you hearing from your fellow law grads?
Okay, well, I talked about my personal experience. I'm home with 2 kids. I'm actually waiting for them to burst through the door at any minute during this broadcast. But I first of all wanted to spell the image of law students, right? The film Legally Blonde doesn't represent us. Quite a small percentage of law graduates actually go to the white shoe big firms and make a whole lot of money, right? The majority of us go into government, public interest, and mid-sized firms. So I have a colleague right now who's scheduled to go to a mid-sized firm, but if the bar exam gets pushed to 2021, she has been told that position will not be available for her. In terms of, I put a call out personally for statements from my peers, and I want to preface that these statements with the fact that most of the students who reached out did not want to be identified by name or even by district in some cases. And that is in large part due to threats students have received in regards to character and fitness and job prospects, that if you speak out on the bar exam and what we are experiencing, that there might be adverse effects or retaliation for your advocacy that could affect your professional careers. And this intimidation is causing a lot of students to keep their heads down. Despite the deep impact this exams administration is having on their lives. So I will refer to individuals by their initials, and these statements have been condensed for brevity. The first is, I'm a first generation high school, college, and law school graduate. I am the oldest child of immigrants. I wear many hats in my family. Pre-COVID, our family plan was that my family would all pitch in to support me during bar prep. For the first time, I would be taking an unpaid leave from work and instead study full-time for the bar exam. My family offered their support so I could focus on myself. By mid-March, that was no longer a reality. Both my parents were unable to work and ineligible for benefits. My siblings became essential workers, risking themselves and us to continue working during the pandemic. Fortunately, I was able to keep working from home to keep my household of 5 afloat, along with my siblings' contributions. I was originally scheduled to take a leave of absence in May to focus on finals and bar exam. When the July bar was canceled, my parents were still unemployed. I changed my leave date so that I could work another 2 months to help keep my household afloat for another 8 weeks. In July, we got the second announcement from the Court of Appeals that the September exam was canceled. About a week later, received an announcement that New York would hold the online bar exam in October. I reached out to my employer, again, letting them know to request a change of my return date to October. I did not receive an answer until yesterday, August 17th, when I was informed that the person that was hired to cover my position will not be able to stay until October. My employer told me that if we can't figure something out, they will have to find someone else in my place. As a person who is contributing to a household of 5 people, I have to think about more than just myself when I plan financially. Entering the job market as a recent grad in a pandemic, I was fortunate to have a position prior to graduation, but that is now at risk. When you have financial responsibilities outside of yourself, options are not actually options. This online exam requires another month of me not working and therefore not earning income. This is from SS. And again, does not want to be identified by district. So we're seeing really, and I have a few more stories. That was probably the longest one, and I don't want to go on, and I will refer to them throughout the situation. But there is just, I think the term is a myriad of ways of how this is playing out and impacting students. I've heard from pregnant students, law graduates who plan their pregnancy and their lives around having their children around the bar exam who are being impacted. Another issue that keeps coming up is this cross current of medical issues, not only pre-existing conditions. You know, people forget that the pandemic pushed all elective surgeries down the line. And while elective surgeries seem like something optional, they're actually really life-saving and life-helping surgeries, and a lot of people are dealing with that. For me, I'm about to go, my son had his tonsils out last week. So it's a lot, and the focus is not just on the exam. What I have to impress upon everyone is that it's about the studying. I have a parent here who has 3 children. His wife is an essential worker and he's home. He's not going to be able to study for the bar exam. I'm not effectively studying for the bar exam because we are juggling real life. And we have just been disregarded in such a callous way, as if we don't matter, as if our families don't matter, and as if this is just not a big deal, which is just so disrespectful to us, I think.
And I'll just before I hand it over to Assemblywoman Simon, I just want to follow up with the Dean about what you're hearing in terms of the plight of your students and not just your school, but you represent deans all across the state. How are students, like we've just heard, grappling with this period of uncertainty and financial and health and housing insecurity?
I mean, everything we've heard from the graduates today is consistent with what we're hearing from, through our networks, from our students, and both at Cornell and at other schools, that they're totally adrift right now. They, for Cornell students in particular, the move of the bar from July was really disruptive because we're here in a college town. They typically would hold their leases in their apartments through August. to study for the July bar, and then their leases would end and they would go off to their new places. With the bar pushed back, initially to September and then to October, they're eating into the next academic year. The housing's not available in the Ithaca area because new students are coming in and have signed leases for that housing, over a year ago. So they've been scrambling to find places to live. Many of them, if they could, went to move in with family, but not all family have the ability to take them in. And so they're doubling up. They're, in the meantime, trying to study for an exam that has already been shifted twice. So it's impossible to exaggerate how disruptive the uncertainty is, and the lack of a livelihood compounds that, right? The inability to gain income while you're studying for the bar means that they're, further eating into either they're further adding to their student debt or other kinds of debt, or they're going without. We've heard about food insecurity, housing insecurity, and just absolute disruption in terms of job searches for students, graduates who were not already employed at graduation. There is this large firm issue with the delayed start dates, I agree. But then, I think as disruptive as that is, it's massively compounded for the students who had not already secured employment by the time of graduation.
Thank you. And just to encourage my colleagues, if they have questions, to raise their hand, I wanted to recognize Senator Phil Boyle. Assemblymember Simon, over to you.
Yes, hi. Thank you. Are we staying on this broad topic, or do you, or?
Yeah, let's get
Okay, because
some more information, but I wanted to see if you had any specific questions for our panelists.
well, I do. I'm mindful of time, but I wanted to speak maybe to Professor Merritt and Mr. Trujillo about this disruption in the lives of recent grads and those who, for example, may be retaking the exam, who were in fact not allowed to even sign up for the New York bar exam, some of them, how this is affecting the legal marketplace. I know, Professor, you have experience with that in a particular context, and Mr. Trujillo, you do as well. Perhaps you could address those issues for us.
Sure. I speak in part for all of the many graduates of schools outside of the state of New York. New York prides itself as being the gold standard of the United States in the legal profession. And I think, unfortunately, you're losing that luster. The reputation of New York has really declined in the legal profession over the last few months because of the ways this has been handled. The Court of Appeals and Board of Law Examiners announced in the spring that priority for the bar exam would be given to graduates of New York law schools. And those like from my law school should go elsewhere, which was an encouragement that violated every health protocol at the time. People were supposed to go across state lines, but my graduates, by the way, go to work for legal aid and for prosecutors' offices in New York. I'm sure they also go to work for law firms, but I happen to teach in our clinics, and so I know those graduates. So our graduates went and signed up for the DC bar exam because that's what they were told to do. And of course, DC canceled their bar exam. I mean, you talk about people having to shift housing. These were people who were shifting plans all around the country. And there's a kind of irony here in that the actions that were taken clearly violate the federal constitution. So here we have a Board of Law Examiners that is violating the Dormant Commerce Clause, a doctrine that is tested on this multiple choice exam. So we're just sort of throwing our hands up in exasperation around the country. But New York has a chance to reclaim its leadership here by doing what some other states have done. The phrase diploma privilege is used, but it's really not a privilege. These are people who have worked incredibly hard for 3 years in law school. I went to law school in the 1970s, as did many of us who are watching this pandemic from our golden years. And these students actually work harder than we did in the 70s, much harder. This is not a party time in law school. The market is tight. And so people are not only balancing classes, they're doing more extracurricular activities than I ever did and working time at the same time. These graduates have now also spent months studying for the bar exam. They're going to have to take the MPRE, pass character and fitness, take the New York law course and exam. There's nothing about this that's a privilege. This is a hard-earned entrance to the legal profession, no matter how you cast it, I think.
I wanted to ask Senator Martinez, I believe, had a question. Or I'm sorry, Member Simon, did you ask another panelist for a comment?
Yes, I had Mr. Trujillo, who I know
Yes, please. Sorry, go ahead.
is dealing with this in the real world right now, how this delay is and the restrictions of the bar exam being even offered to certain people are affecting the legal marketplace in your environment where you work.
And thank you. Really, so it affects people differently depending on if they're first-time takers or if they're retakers. But for everyone that's for everyone who's taking the exam, or at least hopes to be able to take the exam, the ultimate response is just unneeded stress. These are incredibly difficult jobs. These are incredibly difficult jobs if you're a new attorney, and these are incredibly difficult jobs to learn, or law graduate. These are incredibly difficult jobs to learn during the course of a pandemic, where there's already a pretty steep learning curve because with so many legal service jobs, you're just thrown right in. But there's an even steeper learning curve when you're having to deal with, well, what do I do in immigration court when I have difficulty even being able to talk to my clients because of the pandemic? What do I do? It's terrifying generally as a public defender, thinking that someone that you're representing could potentially go into jail. Well, that's even more stressful when going to jail not only means a deprivation of liberty, but that means going into an environment that's a petri dish for COVID. And so with that, doing these difficult jobs and also having to study for the bar exam on top of it, something that Leslie talked about earlier is that it's not just taking the test, it's also studying for the test. And so studying for the bar exam, expecting to take it in September, and then finding out, no, actually the bar exam is delayed until October. It just adds a whole new level of stress for everyone. Especially for first-time takers, because they're still learning the practice of law. But then for retakers who, still even a year into practicing, you're definitely still learning. Years into practicing, you're definitely still learning. On top of that, for them to not even know when they'll be able to retake the exam, it just adds a whole nother level of stress that these folks don't need. For if you failed the bar, if you weren't successful on the bar more than once, you can't practice under the student practice order anymore in New York, which means that you lose your repayment assistance if you have it from your law school, which only about 25% of law schools do. It means that you can't stay in your current position. So hopefully your organization can find a position for you as maybe a paralegal or an investigator. And maybe that means that you have to be terminated from the place that you've been working. And these are folks that have been representing people satisfactorily for several months. And that means that their clients are the ones that ultimately suffer. The last thing I'll say is I want to be mindful of time. Is you think of people that fail the exam, and I think of some of the people that I look up to the most in the world that failed the exam. I think about Michelle Obama and Hillary Clinton and JFK Jr. And Franklin Roosevelt and so many other people who just, for whatever reason, they had difficulty passing the bar. It doesn't have anything to do with your value as an attorney. The bar exam, and I know others have mentioned this, I started my career as a juvenile rights lawyer, not even tested on the bar exam, none of it. And so you can still really successfully practice law. The bar exam isn't a barometer for that. And I think that in New York, there's just so many ways that we can do better.
Thank you, Jared. And I just wanted to ask Senator Martinez. She had a quick question, I believe, for the panelists.
Yes, thank you, Senator Hoylman. So good to see you. And Assemblywoman Simon, thank you as well for bringing this panel together. I do have a couple of questions, but I'm going to try to make it a one big question since they are three questions. But are you, and I'm not sure who to direct this, to the questions to, but are you aware of any other industry that have permanently waived the licensing exams during the COVID pandemic? in New York State. I know that many of our nursing students reached out to us, and they are taking their test socially distanced in different state-approved facilities. And I also know that California also reduced the score necessary for passing. Not sure if anyone has had any communications with California or anyone out there. And is there a difference between the type of work an individual can do while under the supervision of a licensed attorney and once they become a licensed attorney? So will there be a difference in what they are learning under the supervision without taking the exam and or after taking the exam? I'm not sure who can answer those questions for me.
Those are good questions. I think Professor Merritt has a brief answer, and then I'm going to ask Senator O'Mara for a quick question. Then we have to move on to our next topic.
I'll try to answer those one questions to start with the last one. The difference depends a lot on exactly how the order is drafted, but there is a difference usually in whether or not the person can appear alone in court and under what circumstances. And this is one of the reasons why the temporary license really is not going to work for the half of graduates who go to work for government, public and small law firms. It's half of all graduates who work in those places, because those are the employers who really rely on people to be able to take cases on their own and fly with them. That, I think, leads to, I think, an answer to another part of your question, which is, these people do in fact practice effectively. And so we have to wonder about what effect the exam does have in terms of deciding if people are competent. And then to move backwards to the, I'm sorry, question that you had about other industries. I think that if the state had moved quickly in March or even April or May to come up with an online exam that would work or some other approach, that could have been done. But the fact is that our profession has not moved as effectively as the others. Medicine and nursing have made better provisions for how they can integrate their graduates into the practice, and then have longer term have worked that out over the long term. We were at a crisis point in March and April, and the courts and boards of bar examiners just did not respond. On the contrary, the NCBE tried to stop states from doing anything that would be at all different. So we're now in a super crisis point where clients, frankly, are suffering because we don't have this new influx of lawyers the way that they do still have new doctors and nurses in those professions.
Thank you, Professor. Senator O'Mara, did you have a brief question?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chairman Hoylman, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I think I may be the only upstate representative on this forum today.
Oh, don't forget the dean.
I'm going to get to the dean because, as I like to put it, I'm the lucky Republican in the state legislature that gets to represent Ithaca. So, Eduardo, I'm sure you understand what that means. The most conservative environment in the state by any means. But thank you for being here, Eduardo. And it really is. It's a pleasure to serve the Ithaca and Cornell community. It's really a lively place. Certainly adds to the diversity of my district, which would otherwise be quite homogenous. So it's fun to have that. But as a law school graduate myself from Syracuse College of Law in 1991, I can vividly remember the month studying for the bar exam and going through that stressful process. So feel for where each and every one of you are, and truly want to be able to find a way to get you to be able to be gainfully employed in your chosen profession of the practice of law. We got to come up with a way to do it. I have to say that I am extremely disappointed that the New York State bar examiners have chosen not to participate in this forum today. Insulting as far as I'm concerned, not just to us legislators, but to you law school graduates. I know that decades ago we had a process in New York where you could get admitted to the bar without even having gone to law school, just being under the purview of an attorney for several years. In fact, my predecessor and the New York State Senate, George Winter, was one of the last, if not the last, of those individuals to be admitted to the New York State Bar exam without having gone to law school. And I think it's more important having gone to law school for 3 years than it is to pass 1 or 2 exams at the end of it. I do think the exam is important. I think it's a standard to make sure that we have a minimum of competence of individuals going to represent people in court. I myself started out as an assistant district attorney in Manhattan. We took the bar in July, got the results in November, and weren't admitted to the bar until the next, I forget if it was January or February of the next year. So, in a position like that, we were able to do quite a bit as a new law graduate, not admitted to the bar at that point for half a year, basically. So we need to find ways to be able to do that so that you can be gainfully employed. However, I do have concerns with the pending legislation of the 100-hour requirement. I personally don't feel that is sufficient for supervision. Frankly, you could do that in 3 weeks. I think we should have a longer period of supervision required if individuals are going to go into the practice of law. We should be opening up greater opportunities within our public defenders' offices and the like to be able to do more and truly help out in those offices where there's great need for counsel all across the state. We have great need for the public defender bar and young district attorneys all across upstate New York as well. But I'd just like, I guess, to get your thoughts on the 100-hour requirement and, what, I mean, you comfortable with that? Do you think it should be a little greater than that while you're doing it? And I think we should be looking at ways to allow more opportunities for the non-admitted new attorney to be able to do more for the clients. Certainly they can do a lot behind the scenes working for another attorney, but as far as the hands-on, handling depositions, being in court, to make greater opportunities there. So just some thoughts if I could get on those couple of things. Alex?
Thank you, Senator. I'm just going to interject just briefly. I'm one of those late bloomers to the law. I graduated in 1990. But I used to work in DC. I got my master's in Washington, DC. And in fact, federal government attorneys, if you're working for a federal government agency, never have to be licensed to practice. Many of them are, of course, very many of them are, but you could actually work for the federal government, practice at the highest levels and not actually have taken or passed a bar exam. So I think the real issue that we're dealing with is how do we ensure that people have the knowledge they need to have, and there are many ways of getting that knowledge so that you can practice safely. And I know that some of the students or the recent grads wanted to make a comment. I do want to kind of push a little bit because we want to get to the tech issues that are raised with this proposed online exam, as well as what diploma privilege is, and as you know, the technological issues are vast, and I'm happy to set that up when we'll call maybe Senator, you can call on Leslie, Kayla, and Alex have each raised their hands.
Yeah, well, we wanted to move on to technology. In July, I think folks know that Michigan held an online exam that crashed partway through the exam due to a hacking attempt disrupting test takers. Just this week, as we saw when we began this forum, Florida had to cancel its online bar exam scheduled for tomorrow due to security and performance issues with the online test software. I want to ask, is there a sense among those in the legal community that once the public health and concerns about an in-person exam in September were addressed by moving to an online bar exam, all the issues around the exam were resolved? But I want to hear why that's not the case. And we know that's not the case. And Tara, you've had your hand up, and I really do want to hear from you on this issue.
Can you repeat your specific question? I think I was about to talk on a different issue.
Okay, basically, as a differently abled student, what do you see are the issues around an online bar exam?
Sure. So this is Tara, and thank you for deferring to differently abled. I'm very comfortable being identified as disabled. So we have, there are a whole host of concerns, but amongst them are AI flag. We know now you could just follow me. Oh,
Yeah, I think we're having a connectivity issue, which is
that
part of what we're discussing here in terms of technology
is
and
this
bandwidth.
better now?
Yes.
Okay, so the AI will allegedly flag non-typical behaviors. Right now, I'm looking up on my screen, off my screen, and what that would do to the system is raise a flag. Now, a lot of these jurisdictions, New York hasn't really said clearly one way or the other, have said that if there's a flag, they will have a human reviewer. Human reviewers do not take care of the situation. Humans also suffer from implicit bias. And so what you're doing is you're exposing disabled test takers, Black test takers, other folks, other people of color to 2 layers of review. And it's a review that we actually might not escape. You could see that when I looked off my very common non-neurotypical behavior. Can folks hear me?
Yeah.
No.
Oh.
We're having Wi-Fi issues with you, Tara. Sorry.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
It's creepy and funny.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
the connectivity is a little bit problematic. Maybe someone could follow up on the artificial intelligence issue. Kayla, did you want to follow up on that? Because until Tara gets her Wi-Fi back on.
Right. Before I jump into that, I do want to highlight that none of this is hypothetical. These are situations that are actually happening to applicants and graduates. We're talking about how the internet connectivity problems. My internet froze at one point earlier, and now we're having more problems with lag. That's an issue. I also wanted to highlight the senator's initial question about the hours requirement. I can tell you that we are all willing to do more than 100 hours. We just want to work. Those more than 100 hours would be totally fine with us. The problem is that there is just no equitable way to administer this test, which does lead into the AI issues. We know that systemically, it's people of color and people who are disabled who are dealing with whether or not the AI is going to fidget. We also know that it's not set up for us to take the test this way. For anyone who did take the bar exam, the way that we're taking it is completely different from the way that it was taken before. The way that we've been preparing to take this test is different from how we're going to be told to take the test. Mike Sims, the president of Barbary, actually told us he doesn't even know how we're supposed to do certain parts of the test without scratch paper, which we won't be given access to. There are all these different types of accessibility things they're trying to give us, like virtual scratch paper, which isn't the same thing. I know anyone who is studying for multiple choice questions knows that the best way to focus on a question is to annotate, highlight, write the ideas down using process of elimination. And we don't even know if we'll be able to do that because we haven't been given any of the information about what we will really have access to. So even though the AI on a software level is inequitable because the people who are going to be flagged will be people who are disabled or differently abled, or will be Black and brown people, or people with bad internet connections, or anyone who has another person walk into the frame because they don't have access to a private room. There are a lot of equity issues here that cannot be solved, especially in this time frame. I know it's really easy to insinuate that moving the exam to October just means more time to study and more time to get used to it, but plead with you to think about what that stress level was like when you were studying for the bar. Now add a pandemic, now add 3 different date changes, now add a format change. And that's what we're dealing with, on top of the uncertainty of whether or not it'll even be administered. In Florida, their bar exam was canceled 72 hours before they were supposed to take it. It sounds like a nightmare. I can't imagine having to be in that position because I'm already in that position. Our bar exam has been pushed back over and over again. And we know that the way that we're supposed to study for this is to cram in that information in 8 weeks, throw it all on the paper, and then hopefully be licensed to practice. But if we don't take the test till October, that's 5 months of studying. And if you think we're burnt out now, I don't know how we're going to feel in October. So even if the online exam does work, it's still not going to be an adequate representation of our abilities, because even studying for this test has been a nightmare. So I want to point out that this isn't hypothetical. People are losing housing. There are law graduates who are homeless, who do not have jobs, who do not have health insurance, who thought they would have jobs and those offers were rescinded, or their company said they weren't even hiring anymore. So this is a very real situation that we're in, and we're very willing to work with everybody that we can to have an alternate path to licensure. We're not asking for anything to be handed to us. We're asking that the 3 years of law school that we endured makes a difference. We're asking that the New York law exam that many of us took makes a difference. We're asking that the MPRE, our ethics test, makes a difference. We're not just asking to be handed something. We're talking about something that we've worked incredibly hard for, and we would just like to be able to actually do that. But it seems as if the test itself is being prioritized over the actual graduates. So
Thank you, Kayla. And Dean, I see you shaking your head when Kayla was speaking. You've probably seen the technology challenges among your law grads. What are your thoughts?
Well, she's absolutely right. I mean, just finding a place that satisfies the sort of assumptions of the proctoring software is a real challenge. If you imagine, students who are in an apartment with families where people will be walking around in background, that's gonna raise a flag for that software, because it looks at anyone in the room as potentially helping you on the exam. Having to be, have any books out of reach, so they're gonna have to kind of clear out spaces and store books and things so that the software is not triggered by that. One thing we tried to do is make space available in our law school building for students who are in Ithaca, who need a place to take the bar exam. And we thought about using vacant faculty offices, and we were told you're gonna have to cover all the bookshelves with paper so that doesn't trigger the software. So, and I think though, stepping back a little bit, what's striking and what cuts across all of these conversations, and what's really most, I think, offensive about all of this, is all of these challenges sit disproportionately on our most vulnerable students, our most vulnerable graduates. And I don't know what that says about the values of our profession, that at this gateway moment, that we're willing to tolerate these challenges that are, it's inconvenient and hard for everyone who graduated in 2020, but all of these things, maintaining a livelihood, maintaining health insurance, finding a place to live, getting enough food, taking care of your families, finding time to study, finding a place to sit for the exam, all of those are just ratcheted way up for our poorest, our first generation students, our most vulnerable students. And it's just, we're setting up this huge hurdle for them for admission to the bar that just isn't felt in the same way by all of our graduates. And it really, really disturbs me.
Okay. Senator, did you want to call on, I know Leslie had raised her hand, as well as Professor Merritt and Mike Machado. And
Sure, I was trying to be, while we've been speaking, Assemblymember Simon has been reminding me how much time we're taking.
Time we're using.
Which I appreciate. But yes,
so
Leslie.
Leslie,
we'd love to hear from you, and Alex, who hasn't spoken as well, I think may have something to say about the technological challenges. Let me just also say, I think it was the professor who said, the idea of privilege. That is a misnomer. I think there's a misperception, even among lawyers, like those of us who are admitted, that somehow, we have the capabilities, even as law graduates, to overcome this because of our, postgraduate status. But that's simply not the case. Is that right, Leslie?
So thank you. Yeah, I wanna no, it's not a privilege, right? So what we learn in contract law is that we learn about unequal bargaining relationships. There is no bargaining here. For us to be able to practice, to live our lives, we need our licenses. So I want to strike the words stress, inconvenience, because those words do not describe what we are going through, right? This is all encompassing of our lives. This is our everyday, this is our every minute. These are choices that we must make. It's the choice for me when I wake up in the morning of whether I'm going to take my kids outside because they've been cooped up in an apartment all day and turn them off, mentally shut down, and try to turn them off as much as possible to study for an exam that may or may not happen. I want to address the question about other industries and licensure. We saw that the medical students were able to hit the road running and meet the needs of our most vulnerable and our sickest at the height of the pandemic. So there is a little bit of precedent in that. Now, we are not medical personnel, but we are going to be treating all of the repercussions of this in terms of what our clients are facing, especially the most vulnerable that are going to come out from this. And this spans across, right? When we think of the most vulnerable, we think about the poorest, people that are going to, lose their housing. In the midst of this, I was contacted by a working class woman who lives in what is considered an affordable housing complex here in the city, a very popular one. And they were raising her rent 16%. This is someone that is gainfully employed. This is a working woman that has never had problems, that has lived in her apartment for 10 years, but now she is going to be vacating her home for the last decade. So we are going to be meeting the needs of a public that needs us. That's what we're seeking to do. And that is, we just have to impress upon that. Now, in terms of medical and the online, we can look at the Board of Surgical Procedures, I believe. Their online, thank you, Assemblymember Simon. Their exam crashed right in the middle of taking their tests. Their data was breached, financial information was stolen. They were using a live proctoring. Female students were contacted by proctors that had watched them the entire exam on social media afterwards, trying to friend them. So we are talking about when we let any exam software into our computer, we're letting them into the most intimate areas of our lives in terms of our data, our financial information, and maybe even our social and physical features and someone watching us. And that brings into the conversation all of these privacy concerns, First Amendment concerns that people are not really considering. It's suck it up is the attitude that we keep getting, which is really disheartening coming from a profession that we see a high rate of alcoholism, a high rate of addiction, a high rate of depression from. So if we're truly touting the mental health of the profession, of our incoming graduates, there's a conflicting message that we're getting as we enter this profession. We care about your mental health, but not really so much. And that's really, like I said, disheartening for the entire class of 2020 that is going through this. I'm sorry, I went into a lot of different spots there, but it is really all interconnected.
No, that's totally fine. And I want to get to Mike and Alex for some brief comments, and then we'll. And then I think we should address the issue of the alternate paths forward, Assembly Member Simon, and what that looks like. Mike?
Yes, I actually, Senator, if it's okay, do you want me to talk a little bit about some of the technological issues and give everybody in the room a picture of exactly what's wrong with the online exam from that perspective?
Please, that'd be very helpful.
Can I interrupt for just a second, Mike?
Sure, sure.
If you could, in your comments, if you could address issues such as that were alluded to, but for example, there's been no disclosure about what the data collection will be in New York. There have been, we know that there are waivers out there for the use of the software, but that has not been disclosed to anybody in New York. That is a factor of working with a particular vendor, for example, and that these are very complicated waivers, that if you just click on it, you could be waiving all sorts of rights, and obviously that information could be misused. And also just the volume. One of the issues here is that, of course, on October 5th and 6th, this online exam, which was created very recently, is going to be given to easy 15,000 people around the country. And that has never occurred before, ever, in the course of human events, so to speak. And if you could kind of hit some of those points as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Assembly Member.
Sure, absolutely. Just briefly touching on a note, Assemblymember Simon, that the waiver that you described is precisely the waiver that ExamSoft will be having applicants complete. That is what is contained in that waiver. I actually want to lead with a quote. This is from Judge Garcia in a letter to the deans that has since been made public, and it was written in April. Judge Garcia explained that proposals to administer a remote exam come with stern warnings. Inevitably, any remote exam will be accompanied by security risks that cannot be completely mitigated. Exam conditions, proctoring, technology, and security measures vary from one candidate to the next. And then Judge Garcia said, recent attempts to transition to online testing for other high stakes exams have been marked by widespread confusion, debilitating technological glitches, and allegations of compromised exam results. Judge Garcia ended by saying that as the nation's largest legal market, New York simply cannot afford to participate in an experimental protocol. These concerns were concerns that the New York State Bar Association also echoed when its task force issued a report in March. All of the concerns that were enumerated before online exams were administered in other states have actually come into fruition. So what we've seen, and a bunch of people have alluded to this now, is the three software vendors that the NCBE authorized all have their own unique issues. And ILG, ExamSoft, and Extegrity are those three vendors who are authorized to administer the bar exam online. ILG has proven itself unreliable and untrustworthy to the extent that Florida had to cancel its bar exam 2 days prior to the test. ILG proved so unreliable that 2 states decided to administer their bar exam by emailing it to examinees and having them complete it and then email it back afterwards in an open book format, again, trying to just deal with all of the issues ILG presents. Extegrity, the second of the 3 vendors, actually decided not to offer the online exam or to participate in this process. They have a lot of experience. They have 25 years of experience. And after consulting with more experts, realized that administering the exam is too risky because of the proctoring. They feel that the proctoring software isn't ready to handle it and that the server simply couldn't handle the amount of test takers that are going to be taking the exam. And that leads perfectly into the issues that the third of these vendors, ExamSoft, is facing. And I want to remind everybody now that the ILG has proven itself unreliable to the point where many jurisdictions that have agreed to use ILG will probably drop ILG and switch to ExamSoft. At least right now, we know for sure that ExamSoft will host almost 20,000 or maybe more applicants at one time for this test coming up in October. So we've heard that 2 New York Law School deans actually met with the Board of Law Examiners. It's a shame that they're not here today to speak about this because apparently the New York Board of Law Examiners has a lot of confidence in ExamSoft. And that's based on the fact that ExamSoft is used to administer the New York Law Exam. I want to be clear that the New York Law Exam and the bar exam are completely incomparable as far as an online administration goes, because the New York Law Exam is a multiple choice exam that does not require 20,000 people to log on simultaneously and then to submit recording of themselves, audio and visual recordings of themselves, which is exactly what the bar exam in October would require. And that's exactly what ExamSoft would be requiring of students. I'm sorry, I apologize, of examinees. So, whatever the bully's experience was with ExamSoft software in the past, it's nowhere near as predictive of how their experimental exam monitor product is going to work in October, as is ExamSoft's performance in Michigan. So as we know, ExamSoft was used by Michigan to administer the test to only 800 applicants. And what happened? During the exam, it appears, according to ExamSoft, that they suffered what's called a distributed denial of service attack. It suggests, unfortunately, some vulnerability on the part of ExamSoft, and it's an indication that their server lacks capacity. And this was with only 800 or so examinees logging in to take the test. So we don't know, and we have no reason to believe right now, without any sort of stress testing or promise from ExamSoft, that it has the capacity to handle 30,000 simultaneous tests, 20,000 or 30,000 simultaneous test takers. I think that's really cause for concern enough and then you can add on top of that ExamSoft has actually had the FBI and DHS jump in to do an investigation of the cyber attack it suffered during the exam in Michigan. And the results of that investigation, if it even is ongoing, are pending. We still know nothing from ExamSoft, only that it doesn't seem we can necessarily trust their software.
Thank you, Mike. And we're running short on time now, but we're going to now move to the alternate paths forward. And we're going to hear from Professor Merritt about diploma privilege, as it's called, and what you've written about it in the past and how it might work in practice.
I'm happy to address that, although I will actually take 1 minute to say something else about the online exam that hasn't been said. All of these other issues are very true, and on their own would say that this exam is not worth going forward with. But there's an even bigger issue lurking in the background. The New York's cut score is 133. That's what or 266, what you say constitutes passing the exam. That cut score is based on what's known as scaled scores from the exam. The National Conference of Bar Examiners has said that they will not scale the online exam. Instead, they will report raw points, not scaled points. Raw points are much lower than scaled points. So it could be, for example, that a 124 raw is equal to a 133 scaled. That would be a passing score in New York, but you'll have no way of knowing. This exam is really, I hate to use this word, but it's almost a charade. It's a pretend exam because there's no way to score it, even if we get through all of these other problems. And I've asked NCBE about this, and their response is, well, that's up to the states. The states set their cut score. So the psychometricians know this is a problem, but they're not being sufficiently candid, I think, about it. So then a brief thing about diploma privilege with all of its other accompaniments. I think at the very beginning of all this, I was a strong advocate for the supervised practice. We originally proposed 240 hours of supervised practice. Utah adopted our proposal, but went with 360 hours. Those numbers were based on how much time people spend studying for the bar exam. We figured if you spend 6 to 9 or 10 weeks studying for the bar exam, rather than spend that time cramming in order to answer these multiple choice questions, people could engage in real law practice, get supervision and feedback and so forth. At this point, I actually think that, these graduates have already spent months studying for this bar exam. And so it's no longer an issue of replacing that time. I think that as Leslie and others have suggested, they want to work. So it would be fine to do more than 100 hours. You could also consider counting time spent in law school clinics. Those are heavily supervised experiences like supervised practice. If somebody has there are some people who will have done 600 hours of work already in law school clinics. So I think that at this point, the best and in some ways only way forward for New York, for its clients, for the graduates who want to take this exam. But I particularly stress the clients. I really do care most about the clients. And the clients are going to be served if these eager new hope-to-be lawyers are able to get to work serving those clients. And I think we know that they have the qualifications. It doesn't make sense to put more stress upon them and to have what's going to be a sort of charade of an exam that will only end up failing people who would have passed under a regular exam instead of going forward with an alternative like this. So I hope New York will in fact become the gold standard again and join several other states in taking what seems to be the most responsible course.
Speaking of a charade of an exam, Dean Garcia, Judge Garcia, in his letter to law school deans, says that the bar exam is an accurate measure of proficiency. Dean, do you agree with that? That even before this difficulty that we're facing now, that the bar exam itself is an accurate measure of proficiency for someone to practice law?
Well, I mean, I think it's helpful to kind of separate out the moment and the crisis of the moment from these sort of prior debates about the bar exam. And I think that even if you thought the bar exam was a great way to measure proficiency for practice, the circumstances that we're facing, call into question the fairness of requiring it for the graduates of 2020. That said, I mean, I having sat for the bar and then gone on to practice law, certainly knowledge of some law is important, and the bar exam does measure some knowledge of law, but it's mostly a huge memory test, and you cram for the bar, you write down your answers, and about a month later you can't remember 75% of what you knew when you sat for the bar. It bears very little resemblance to what practicing lawyers do. So I think there's a case to on reflection to kind of rethink the bar exam and what it's doing. And I understand that the Court of Appeals has called for that, and I support that. I think we need to look at how we're measuring readiness to practice and how we grant our licenses. But I think that's in some ways kind of separate from the immediate question.
Yes, this is one of the opportunities that the pandemic, for better or worse, presents us. Assembly Member Simon, did you have a question or wanted to follow up on the issue of our legislation and how it might work?
Well, yes, as you know, we have two bills. One does not require supervision. One suggests 100 hours of supervision. And I know that Senator Hoylman and I are certainly happy to look at that. We are concerned about a number of things. And that is, we are concerned about the online test and the fact that it's lacking in so many properties of what the bar exam relies on to support its argument that it's a valid measure of a certain body of knowledge that someone needs to demonstrate in order to essentially protect the public and be able to practice law. We all know, of course, as Dean, as you've mentioned, it's a great deal of memory because when you're in practice, what is the first thing anybody will tell you is look it up. Never rely that you just happen to remember, Federal Rule of Civil Procedure XYZ. You always look it up. And in fact, that's a very good thing. And 2 states have gone to open book exams, which makes perfect sense. The practice of law is open book. And, I like the idea that Professor Merritt suggested about using clinical hours. As somebody who taught at a law school clinic for 4 years, I'm a big fan of clinical education and how important that is to the development of young lawyers. And it really gives them a tremendous amount of experience. I might also suggest, as someone who went to law school at night and worked full time, that working in a law firm, even if you're not as a lawyer, you learn from being in a law firm. So if you were working as a law clerk in a law firm while you were in law school, that might also be experiential and might count towards admission. I think what we sort of come down to is feeling that people know enough. They've gone to law schools that are accredited by the ABA. The ABA itself has passed a resolution supporting this notion. And the reality is that in New York State, within a year, over 91% of the people who take the test have passed the bar exam. And we know that not passing the bar exam, there are many, many people who fail the bar exam several times and go on to very, very distinguished legal careers. So, I'm interested in people's reflections on why this is more equitable. I know a number of people have mentioned that before. It seems to me that there are validity issues and reliability issues with the giving of an online exam, plus just the technological issues of whether or not the exam is just going to blow up in the middle of the test. And then what do we do? I feel like there's no plan B, and I would like people to address that issue.
Yeah, Tara, we'd really like to hear from you. We're sorry that.
That's okay. That's okay.
I hope it's working now.
Is everyone okay now? Can we hear me better? Oh, wow, I just got an.
And then after you, we're going to go to Alex.
Okay, so, I will say that diploma privilege is the only equitable option right now. I mean, even in the best of times, the exam is an exam of working memory, and that is not an indication of who and who is not going to be a competent and valiant attorney. As someone who frequently relies on notes, it would be malpractice if I did not look things up while I was practicing. And I would never want a client to get representation like that. I have represented with supervision clients in law school. I very much, I like the idea of counting clinic hours, but this idea, the diploma privilege being the only option, is inextricably related to the fact that the online bar exam isn't an option. And you are going to have disabled students making the choice about whether they will test in person or whether they will forego the exam. This is not a hypothetical situation for them. They will have to decide if they want to risk their lives to take this exam. And I guess the BOLE has to ask themselves, are they comfortable with people making that calculation? Because I'm not comfortable with people making that calculation. I would never want a client to make that calculation. And I frankly don't understand why we can't come up with a better option, and diploma privilege truly is the only path forward. I'll defer to more folks to talk about the technical aspects of this, but honestly, 100 hours is just 100 hours more than all of the preparations we've already been going through. We go to ABA accredited schools, and even when we don't go to ABA accredited schools, we are doing internships, we are training, we are working with clients, we have mentors, we have professors. And it's frankly disrespectful and disparaging to say that we wouldn't care enough to prepare ourselves to become competent if we did not take the bar exam.
Thank you. And Alex, what's your perspective?
Yeah, thanks. As someone who recently took the bar exam and also just graduated with this graduating class, I feel confident that all of them are prepared after graduating to practice. I think it's important to note that there are, the ABA requires that all students take at least 6 experiential credits to graduate law school. And so folks are doing either clinical work where they're directly representing clients while they're in law school, or a seminar where you're doing a simulation of actual practice. And so so the Court of Appeals has waived the standard requirement that folks complete a minimum of 50 pro bono hours, but most students have done at least 50 pro bono hours in anticipation of needing to do that to graduate and be admitted. So people have a lot of experience already. And then I'm going to talk quickly about the bill that would require supervision. That, as Kayla said, is not just asking to be admitted going to law school. People are still taking the New York Law exam, the multi-state professional responsibility exam, going through the character and fitness process, which allows all of the folks who have supervised you in a legal setting to talk about whether you're fit to be an attorney or not. You also have to have an intent to practice primarily in New York. So this directly serves our community, which there's a heightened need for legal services right now in the wake of pandemic, hopefully the wake. And the final thing is 100 hours of supervised practice, which your supervisor then submits an affidavit. And I just want to point out also that the Court of Appeals is very familiar with a process like this, because in the Pro Bono Scholars program, I took the February exam and then I was supervised for 520 hours, and my supervisor submitted an affidavit stating that I did that. So I feel confident that all of these different opportunities to actually practice have prepared people to be attorneys, and that also when people start jobs, they're heavily supervised, right? I mean, when you enter a place as a new attorney, you're not just totally on your own. You are supervised similarly to the way the fellows and interns are supervised, and have opportunities to learn in that way. So we're not asking for folks to be just licensed and go out on their own. We're asking for folks who have done a lot of work to prepare, had experience working with clients, and will continue to receive supervision to be licensed to practice.
Thank you. There is a strong sense, and as someone who took the bar prep courses, that you get a sense that there's a racket here. It's a cottage industry. It's preparing, students having to prepare, spend thousands of dollars to do so. And that there are a lot of people who have vested interests in the status quo. Let's just be clear about that. So I think that's one of the challenges that we face. I wanted to hear from Leslie, though she had her hand up.
Yeah, I just want the inequity of this of an online exam just lies in the fact that multi-member households are going to pay a tax. You know, this idea that we can reserve, as the Board of Law Examiners put it, reserve a quiet space. You know, if you live in a multi-member household, whether it's children, whether it's older generations, whether it's roommates, you just are not going to be able to have the focus, the space and time to mental and physical space to be able to take this exam. Now, when we talk about the possibility of taking this exam at our law schools, I so appreciate that. And I'm going to be a person that's situated that way. But then we're going to get back to the similar problem that we had with the in-person exam, which is law students congregating, because we don't know how many there's going to be, and there are going to be safety measures, but you're still going to have groups of students returning to their schools to take an exam during classes for those schools that are also going to be open and administering classes. And then again, going back to the historical roots, right? This idea of apprenticeship, this idea of supervised practice, this is not new. This is the root of how lawyers came to be back when the profession started here in the United States in the 1700s. Now, maybe certain bar exams did develop at that time, but it wasn't the formalized process that it is now. We know that the formalized process came in the late 19th century when people of color, Blacks and immigrants came to this country, and basically we were barred out. You know, the profession wanted to look and stay a certain way in terms of gender and in terms of race. Now, the disparate impact that we're talking about in terms of this online exam and everything that everybody's experiencing, that may not lay on racial lines. It may not, because this is really an economic class issue and how this is financially and medically affecting people. But we can hypothesize fairly well that this is going to fall harder on communities of color, of students from communities of color, of graduates from communities of color. We've already seen in the news the rates for Black communities and Latino communities that have been affected disproportionately by the pandemic. So we are really talking about a social justice issue. We are talking about an equity issue in a profession that, quite frankly, is not diverse. Another thing that the profession, holds up is that we want to diversify, we want to diversify, we want to diversify. But again, practice of what the profession is touting and what they're doing to this class and to whoever comes back after us in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a social reckoning on race, is basically not in line with what they're saying that they uphold. And it's not the message that we're getting. So we really do have to think about, if we want this profession to change, diversify, if people want their lawyers to look like them, quite frankly, what are we doing to facilitate that? And this exam is going to fall much more harshly and basically stop people, because they're going to make the choice not to take the exam. They're going to make the choice, as one student in my school did when things shut down, to go home and drop out of law school. Because we're already paying the LSAT tax. We're already paying the law school tax. We're, as you said, the exam prep tax and the fees and the personal tax of taking the exam and hopefully passing. And then if not passing, taking it again. So I just want to really emphasize that this is about access to the profession. This is about humanity. And as Kayla said earlier, we have never, ever asked for a free pass. We have asked for humane accommodation. And that's what diploma privilege would be, whatever it looks like, 100 hours, 1,000 hours. We have never put a limit on what we were willing to do to make this possible.
Okay, we're going to close our conversation in a few minutes, but I wanted Assembly Member Simon to give some closing remarks and also ask if there are any panelists who would like to comment. Assembly Member?
Yes, thank you very much. I think that we've explored a number of issues here, and I think we've already gone over time. And I think that that's an indicator that we could probably spend much more time on these very important issues. We are really at an inflection point in our country, in our society. So many of the issues that we have been addressing with regard to equity, both in terms of people of color, in terms of disability issues, in terms of just equitable treatment of women. Our industry has not been as responsive to those issues in the past. We need to be more so now. COVID has laid bare so many of the issues that affect our society. And really, we need to find a way forward. We need to find a way that is not based on prior assumptions of how things should go, what we would like things to be. We really have to deal with reality in a very different way going forward. And my door is open. My email address is open. I know we've heard from many of you. We want to hear from other people as well. We want to find a way and a path forward. Right now, many of us have talked about this issue of alternate admissions to the bar. And once upon a time, there were other ways to get to the bar. And some of those have just fallen out of favor or been foreclosed by other practices more recently. But I think we need to look at these issues. I know that the Court of Appeals has been looking at the bar exam in going forward, but that's a multi-year process. And one of my concerns about this online exam is that it's a product of the National Conference of Bar Examiners, created really at a time of stress, at a time where they didn't have enough time to test the product. And I'm concerned that the people who would be taking the bar exam in October are in fact going to be part of a great giant beta test. And I'm very concerned that that beta test is going to harm people and can harm people in so many ways, including the misuse of artificial intelligence, including the stress on people, including the fact that you just can't even for 90 minutes get up and use the restroom if you need to. And what do you do if you're pregnant and taking this exam? There are so many ways that the online exam affects people that haven't really even been explored yet. And we don't know yet what it is that all of those constraints will be, because we haven't heard that information yet from the Board of Law Examiners. So I want to thank everybody, all of the advocates, all of the legislators who have tuned in, those who are on the Zoom, those who are watching us on the live stream. Thank you very much for all that you have contributed to this. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you and with Senator Hoylman on making this happen. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Assemblymember Simon. Thank you to all of our panelists. I know there's much more to be said. I wanted folks to know that we've had over 8,500 views on this Zoom panel, which suggests the not just the interest, but the concern among recent law graduates across this state, and the need for the Board of Law Examiners and the Court of Appeals to address this issue further. They cannot stop. The current situation is untenable for our recent law grads. And as Jared pointed out, it is going to undermine our ability to help low-income clients survive and thrive post-COVID-19. So that's our mission today, and I wanted to thank all of my colleagues for participating in this important conversation, and most importantly, our panelists, and among the panelists, the law grads whose voices have not been heard adequately. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Assemblywoman Simon.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.